From folklore and fairies
to monsters and mysteries, it came from the Maritimes.
Teeth ground sharp and eyes glowing red, I'd like to introduce my co-host, Evan.
The reason why my foot can't be out from under the blanket at night, my co-host, Chelsea. Hi everyone, and welcome to It Came From The Maritimes. Today's topic is the wailing wretch known as the Hidey Hinder of Dagger Woods. As a warning, this episode discusses death, suicide, and murder, including harm to children. That sounds very serious, and
That's a sinister start.
It is. Have you heard of the Hidey Hinder before?
I believe. Is there a song about this?
There is, by the Stanfields.
Yes, so I have heard that song before, but that's about the extent of my knowledge.
Fair enough, and that seems to be a variation on the more popular story about it.
Ooh, I like it. I can't wait to learn more.
Yeah. Dagger Woods is an area not far from Antigonish, Nova Scotia. Since it has been settled in the late 1700s, there have been stories of mysterious occurrences. There was a lot of debate about what exactly is causing these, and even more debate over what the creature causing these occurrences is called. The main names given are the Hidey Hinder of Dagger Woods, the Bokken of Meadow Green, and the Dagger Woods Howler. All of these stories have one thing in common, though, and that's that there will be a shrieking sound, which will first sound far away, but will become closer and closer until it's deafening, and at that point, it will be too late.
Oh my goodness, and to think that this is lurking in our province.
I know. You go a little bit past Antigonish, and, anyone going from Cape Breton to St. FX?
Well, I feel like it's interesting. So I went to the Halifax Paranormal Symposium back in early October, and one of the speakers there actually mentioned that similar to how there's like the Bermuda Triangle and Bridgewater Triangle areas that have like enhanced occurrences of paranormal events, there's a lot going on in that Antigonish area. So yeah, it's interesting. There seems to be a lot because we'll cover other things in future episodes. But yeah, I know this is one of the big stories from that region.
I wonder, was that where one of the fairy mounds was?
It was, yeah.
Huh, interesting. First, I'm going to start with some possible stories that explain what the Hidey Hinder is. And then I'm going to go into some stories that people have told with their encounters. One of the main explanations is that this is a Bokken that traveled over in a ship with Scottish settlers. You might remember a couple of episodes ago when we talked about the Bokken of the Black Grounds, and it's a Scottish hobgoblin, and in a lot of stories is really used as kind of a boogeyman, vague monster. Some stories that don't include the Bokken tell of a man who murdered his wife and children with a pearl-handled dagger, and in these stories he ran into the woods to hide, and then some say he used the knife to kill himself and came back as an undead spirit or creature, and others say that he is still out there as an immortal monster, recreating his most heinous act over and over again. Some stories have the Hidey Hinder being more of a mischievous trickster, while others tell tales about piles of bones with tooth marks in them.
My goodness, either way, I wouldn't want to come across it.
Yeah, so all of these, there's a lot of variation in kind of the origin of the creature, but they're all kind of end with the same creature, more or less.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So I'm going to start telling some stories, starting with milder tales and getting into the larger ones. So the first is about a man and his sister who were driving through the area of Dagger Woods. Apparently their father had told them the story of the Bokken when he was there 60 years prior, and at that time he was on his horse and heard shrieks so loud that the horse collapsed and started sweating. Their father also told them that in the area, barrels were known to be floating in the air with fire coming out of each end, and there was also a man there in a gray coat who was known to be very mysterious. No one ever talked to the man, and they couldn't really approach him because there was all of these dangers floating around. One man had a few drinks to gather courage and try to talk to him, but was chased away by a flying pot. And the siblings, as they were driving through the area, heard some shrieks and decided to get out of there as fast as they could.
My goodness, so there's floating barrels on fire, there's flying pots. It's interesting because in that area, and I won't get into too many details of the story because I'm confident we're going to cover it in the near future, but have you ever heard of the Mary Ellen Spook Farm?
I have.
So I think that's quite close to that Dagger Woods area where that story occurred. And that was essentially like a poltergeist story where there were random fires starting in the house. There were pots that would fly to the edge of the property. So it's just interesting the consistencies between this Balkan story and that poltergeist story. I wonder if there's any relation between them.
No, that's really interesting. And I'll say, like, I don't know if this man in the gray coat is fully associated with the monster or if it's just a completely different occurrence, but he's come up in a couple of the different stories that I've heard. So he seems to be a mainstay of the area.
Well, that's it. And I know, once again, I'm not going to get into too many details, but I know there's also supposed to be a lake haunted by the ghosts of soldiers in that Antigonish area. So I wonder.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
It's just interesting, kind of the overlap.
A lot going on in Antigonish. So as we talked about earlier, there's also a song by the Stanfields titled Dagger Woods. And in this tale, it's more of a variation of the tale of the man who killed his wife and children. And in this one, a man, a woman, and their 2 babies are out in the woods, and the Hidey Hinder incapacitated the man, killed the woman and children, and later the man is arrested and locked away after being accused for the monster's deed. So it's kind of a variation of the story of the man with the pearl dagger there, who is supposedly supposed to be the monster.
Yeah, so essentially the man was framed.
Yeah.
Interesting. I wonder which version is true.
Well, that's the thing. And in this one, he's framed by the monster for the thing that the monster supposedly did, which is an interesting version. And then the larger story that I found is the story of Sandra. She was a girl who was savvy in the outdoors and loved to collect blueberries so her mother could make her blueberry muffins. She had heard stories of Dagger Woods from her father, and she knew that people often entered the woods and never came back. But she was also on the hunt for berries. Once she found them, she started picking, but as her basket was nearing full, she heard a distant shriek. At first, she hoped that it was her brother playing a trick, but as the shrieks got louder and nearer, she began to worry. She knew that the Hidey Hinder would scare people and cause them to panic, making them run and get lost, and therefore easier to catch. She also knew that the only way to beat the beast was to see it, as the Hidey Hinder was terrified of seeing its own reflections in a person's eyes. Keeping composure was difficult when she could smell the rancid breath of the Hidey Hinder on her neck. She spun rapidly, hoping to catch a glimpse, but failed to do so. The Hidey Hinder is expert in staying just out of eye line. She was dizzy and stumbled away from the howler, falling over by the river. And this was where she had some luck, in that she looked down into the river where there was a little bit of still water and saw the reflection of the Hidey Hinder. Even through the water, this reflection was enough to go to her eyes and cause the monster to vanish in a puff of smoke. After that, she told her story, but she couldn't or wouldn't tell anyone what the monster looked like. Anytime she went into the woods after that, she carried a pocket mirror.
I must say, those must be some damn good blueberry muffins if she's willing to risk going into like this haunted forest to collect the blueberries.
Yeah, I really like the detail of the pocket mirror. Kind of reminds me of like Medusa.
Yes, where it helps shine that reflection and save them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I find in so many other stories like Screecher's Hollow, the mirror was Marie's undoing, whereas here the mirror is something that could...
Yeah, it could save her.
Yeah.
So hearing these stories, I thought about a couple of other shrieking beings. One of the most common ones, a Celtic spirit, the Banshee, and that actually translates to Lady from the Fairy Mound. They are known to shriek, which heralds the death of a loved one or family member. Though they are seen in all sizes, they tend to be between 1 and 4 feet tall, kind of showing off their fairy-like features. And then another being is the Drikavac, which is from Slavic folklore. And there's a lot of different versions. One is the undead of a sinful man rising from the grave to haunt the living. The next is a risen, unbaptized baby who asks to be baptized to allow them peace. And the other is a humanoid dog creature. So a lot of variation here.
There's a lot going on in that one creature.
Yeah, they're seen at night, and particularly on the 12 nights of Christmas. You know, getting into that spirit.
It is. We're feeling festive these days.
And though the versions differ greatly, they all shriek as a premonition of death. Often, if they're in the human form, it's the death of a family member. And if they're in an animal form, like the dog humanoid creature, it usually is the premonition of death of an animal. And it's said if its shadow touches you, that you will become sick and die.
My goodness, another creature I wouldn't want to stumble across in the woods.
No, and that's the thing. I don't think anyone would want to see it, but there's kind of some other creatures that are known to shriek and cause some bad things to happen. So now I'm gonna just talk about something that interests me in its relation to folklore. Hopefully it will interest some of you as well. I'm going to talk about a segment called that I call my favorite monster. And today, I'm going to talk about something from my youth, Pokemon. I know what you're thinking, isn't that just a video game? And yes, it is. There's a lot of cute little fuzzy guys, but also, there's a lot of folklore that they put behind these monsters, and a lot of them are based on folklore as well. I know growing up, I watched the TV show religiously, and I have a holographic Charizard Pokemon card that was gifted to me by Chelsea, so thank you.
You're very welcome.
So Pokemon are fun and wonderful creatures, but as I said, they also have a rich history and folklore, with many of their designs being based on folklore. An example of this is Magikarp, which is a fish Pokemon that is based on the Chinese story of the Dragon's Gate. The story says that if any carp can climb the waterfall and jump over the gate, that it will be turned into a mighty dragon. True to the story, Magikarp evolves into Gyarados, a Pokemon based on Asian dragon designs. Now, we tend to talk about spookier things here, so now I'm going to get into some of the spookier things, and a lot of those are ghost-type Pokemon.
Ooh.
One example of this is Banette, which appears as a haunted toy. It has a description that says, it is an abandoned plush doll that became a Pokemon. They are said to live in garbage dumps and wander about in search of the children that threw them away.
Oh my gosh.
I know. Not only is this a sad tale, but within the folklore of Pokemon, it implies that object can become living due to intense sadness. They are also thought to be based on, and I'm sorry, I'm not great at pronouncing Japanese, Tsukumogami of Japanese folklore, which are objects that have taken on a spirit. And one other Pokemon I'm going to talk about is Yamask, which appears like an almost bird-shaped shadow that carries the mask of a human face. It is said that each of them carries a mask that used to be his face when it was a human. Sometimes they look at it and cry.
Oh my goodness, who knew Pokemon had such a deep, dark history behind it?
Well, it also implies that humans can become Pokemon after they die, which is kind of distressing.
Are Pokemons all just ghosts and demons and creatures?
Some of them are just cute little guys.
I don't know, Pikachu has a real sinister edge to him.
I guess so. But it is also believed to be based... Yamask, getting back to Yamask... is believed to be based on an Egyptian Ba, which is a person's soul, and is often shown as a bird, or a Shut, which is actually spelled SWT, which is the shadow of a human soul. And the mask it carries is thought to be a death mask, which is the casting of someone's face taken after their death. So this is something they used to do where they would basically take a plaster casting of your face after you died. And I thought these were just some interesting examples of some things that were related to folklore, but also something that growing up and to some extent today, I still love.
I really enjoyed that. Thank you for sharing.
I mean, if you ever discover the deep, dark secrets of Pikachu, you let me know.
So I remember just like Pokemon was a big part of our childhood. Evan and I used to get an allowance, and it was like a loonie a week when we were like very young, and we pooled our money for like 10 weeks so that we could afford to buy the Pokemon VHS when it came out.
A classic.
So thank you for sharing that. It was a fun blast from the past.
Thank you for listening, and thank you everyone out there for listening. If you want to find us on social media, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, you can find us at It Came From The Maritimes, on X at ICFT Maritimes, and if you have any Atlantic Canada folklore you would like to see covered in a future episode, or spooky encounters of your own, email us at itcamefromthemaritimes@gmail.com. If you enjoy our podcast, please leave us a 5-star review. It helps people find us. At the end of each episode, we like to have a little fun and share a East Coast folklore tip that we found. It's nothing too serious, just something that we like to look at for a little bit of fun. Chelsea, would you share our tip, please?
I will. This is relevant because of the knife featured in this story. So according to Nova Scotians, turning a knife on a table is bad luck. I certainly won't be doing it.
Neither will I.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.